I'm still not going in there right now.
Hello.
All right, well, we are about at 5 after, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. I think, Max, are you going to be doing our introduction here today?
Yeah, I'm going to open it up. I want to welcome everyone for being here at this second NASW call on racial justice and social action. And the one thing that I want to stress, and I stress this, I think, every time I talk to folks, is that NASW can only do the work with all of you. We need you. And as one voice, we're not nearly as powerful as we can be with multiple voices. And now in 2020, you know, I was talking to someone today and I said, I think some of my anger has dissipated, but what I feel is this incredible sadness. And this sadness is about the killing of Black men and women, the disrespect towards people of color and people regardless of their religion. And it's time to stop. It's time to step back and to open our eyes and open our ears and feel the world around us and say, okay, we're going to come together and we're going to make a difference. And we at NASW Michigan are certainly working hard to make that difference, and we need you. If you're not a member, your voice is still welcome. We'd love to have you as members because we know how to find you much easier if you're a member. So please join us in this call and all of our efforts to come, because I don't want to feel sad anymore. And my hunch is that no one on this call wants to feel angry, sad, sick, hurt, scared. We want to live. So this is a call for voices to come together to help us all live in the quality that we need to live in and the quality that we ought to be living in. So thank you for joining this call. And with that, I'll turn it over to our three leaders tonight.
So I believe that I am the first question, correct?
Okay. Sure.
Okay. Dwayne, can you share the PowerPoint for everyone to see?
I will do that in just a second. I know Sarah's going to bring that up. While I'm doing that, I did want to just let folks know that we are going to keep folks muted today. So if you do want to comment, please raise your hand just click the raise your hand icon. And when we have open comment time, we'll open up your line for you. Please also, we encourage folks to type into the chat box. There's going to be a lot of resources shared there. And what we will also do is put the chat log on our website for folks, so you don't have to copy all of those links down after this call today.
Michelle, while Dwayne's loading your information, do you want to say a little bit about who you are and
yeah, sure,
what you do, and then when you pass on to the next person, they can do the same?
Yep, absolutely. So my name is Michelle Mattison. I am the immediate past NASW MSW student representative for the Michigan chapter. I recently graduated with my master's in social work from the University of Michigan, so go blue to all the Wolverines on the call. A little bit about myself is I am a yoga enthusiast. I've taught yoga for about the last 5 or 6 years. I truly enjoy helping people with improving their mental health quality and just talking about really difficult conversations. I'm a co-host of a newly launched podcast entitled Complex Perspectives, where we focus on having difficult conversations and providing healing mechanisms and conflict resolution skills in difficult conversations. So as we begin today, this is a really actionable step from our last town hall that we had, really to focus on how to provide tools of advocacy, allyship, and action in a sustainable way for us as social workers. And before we begin, Dwayne, you can go to the next slide if you can. We want to have a moment of silence for all of the individuals that we've lost to police brutality and systemic racism. So we'll begin now. Ashay. Okay, so one thing that I really would like for us to do before diving into our allyship portion, I know in our last call, I prefaced the conversation with the idea of tension and how if it circulates in the body with no place to go, it becomes pain. So the three of the facilitators, including myself on this call, wanted to provide tangible resources for social workers in the state of Michigan to use that tension that's within our body to actually transform it into some type of action, so that we can work with the pain, we can work against the pain, and we can create new avenues for structure and new avenues, for advocacy. Dwayne, you can go to the next slide. So the portion that I'll be covering today is allyship. And the reason why we wanted to include allyship in a call that's with a diverse body of social workers, I know there are Black social workers on here as well, is that allyship is a verb. It's not really so much as a credit that you can take. It's like a class. You can't get a credit in it and say that, okay, I'm an ally, I'm a lifelong ally. It's really a lifelong style of action. However you want to use your allyship is more of a focus on an actionable oriented item. Okay, Dwayne, you can go to the next one. So, understanding the role of compassion in allyship. The reason why I included this part here is because allyship is typically thought of as something that we can teach to our white peers or our white social workers and how to align with liberating the Black community. The role of compassion here is very critical and it's very essential. We're going to operationalize it. Yes, you'll be able to get a link. We'll operationalize compassion as the ability to have empathy for another person's journey while not prioritizing theirs over your own. And the reason why we include that is because for allyship, though we as Black social workers that are on the call may need to allow our white peers and our white social workers to really gain the bulk of the work in allyship, it's also a joint venture that we have to include ourselves in supporting. So the idea of compassion and allyship is really to focus on not so much how do I support my ally in becoming an ally, but understanding that we are all on a learning curve. So we can identify it as a continuum, like a long line that's a continuum with little points at different segments of the continuum. And as allies, you might come to a point, sink deep into that point, come out, and it's not a linear process. So it's not going to go in a nominal order of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are some times you'll go from step 1, get boosted all the way to step 6, and then find out that you need to go back and do work from 2 to 5, right? And that's a very difficult process for our allies and also for us that need allies. So centralizing our allyship in a role of compassion, meaning that we as Black social workers, we have to check our daily capacities and what we are able to do to support our allies. And also for those who are wanting to become allies, understanding that the work really is on your shoulders. However, there are Black social workers and members of the Black community that will have compassion for you as you are in this process as well, without prioritizing your experience before the burden of understanding what we're going through, if that makes sense. So bottom line about compassion is that we need each other and understanding that we're all humans in this process. However, we live in a system that systemically and disproportionately disadvantages a lot of us. So when we're looking at the allyship component, really institutionalizing the idea of compassion and how you approach it, and also how you support others in pursuing their allyship. Okay, Dwayne, you can go to the next one. So then I want to move into this kind of conceptualizing what allyship looks like. A lot of the literature and a lot of the information that's been circulating around on the internet has distinguished allyship into two different segments. So this authentic type and the performative type. The authentic type as social workers is what we're hoping to, is the direction that we're hoping to go in. So this authentic style of allyship is first starting with becoming self-aware, meaning that you're becoming you're not only becoming aware of the privileges that you hold and the spaces that you occupy, but you're becoming aware of the things that you were conditioned to believe growing up. Maybe the first time you encountered the idea of what race was, and finding out as an ally where you stood, maybe in the lesson that you learned about the history of Black folks, or the way that you integrated or learned, and what were the messages that you were taught, like your implicit biases and things of that nature, as you grew older about the Black community, and learning how to really emphasize becoming self-aware and using that in your social work practice. So this is centered on how to apply it as social workers, but we all know that many of the topics that we're passionate about have some deep root within us. So if allyship, this authentic form of allyship, is to be deep rooted in you, starting with becoming self-aware and understanding the privileges that you hold, the way that they've engaged in the system of oppression, and the way that it's exploited members of the Black community and other marginalized communities. Then you move to this phase of accountability, and what that looks like is doing the work. I know a lot of people have heard the term of check your privilege and learning what that might mean, but accountability is really focusing on the component that you approach a subject as knowing that it is your role to educate yourself. And then as a social worker, you have an additional layer of accountability because you're equipped with different skills that other people in other professions may not have. So social workers may have the unique lens of assessment. They may have the unique lens of intervention or some type of healing modality that you use on your daily practice. And that's specifically from a micro lens. And then also from a macro lens, you may have more of an administrative role where you oversee organizations that provide certain types of services in communities. So it's the accountability portion that we're talking about here, that you in either a micro or macro lens are using that challenge of accountability to really educate yourself and infuse change in the organizations in which you participate in. And then lastly, of this authentic allyship perspective, you're developing an anti-racist approach. So not just a non-racist where, okay, no, that's not me. Because anytime you say non-racist or no, I'm not racist, or I step back from it, you really allow yourself to dwindle in that gray space, and that gray space of indecisiveness and racism becomes oppression. So when you allow yourself to stay in that middle bunk of gray space, when we're talking about racist activity, when we're talking about systemic racism, you're really allowing the oppressive components that are perpetuated in those systems to win and to continue going. So as an ally, the hope here is that you're charging yourself to not be non-racist, as Angela Davis would say, but to be anti-racist. Because anti-racist, it infers this theme of action. It infers the living intention that you will always be anti and against racism. Okay, so we can go to the next one.
Michelle, there was a question that came in on Facebook that maybe I think kind of fits in right here as well, around talking about allyship and action specifically. And this came from Chris on Facebook. He just said, the thing I don't like about the word ally is that it is so wrought with guilt and shame and grief that it prevents people from doing what they ought to do. And he did share a link as well, which I put in the chat box, and really thinking about co-conspirator or in solidarity. What does that mean in terms versus like the actual term ally, which I think most folks are more familiar with.
Right. Thank you for the resource. And that's actually a really great point. That's also why we included the first slide of compassion. So when we're talking about allyship and that blanket term, I think that he's more so referring to how it has this condescending, guilt shaming perspective that because you're trying to become an ally, you are presumed guilty of absolutely every single thing that one person on the continuum may experience. That's the whole role of compassion, to understand that it's not just a process for a person who's trying to subscribe to new anti-racist ways, but then also to have compassion for the room of growth. And we're all on this learning curve together. So that's why compassion is included in that piece. So thank you so much for bringing that up, Chris. And then the third piece of performative allyship is really an approach that I wanted to highlight here for us as social workers to recognize, since specifically for micro social workers, we're trained with that lens of assessment. Understanding that when you are doing the work in allyship, if you, be it with a client, be it with, maybe your colleagues, that you're starting to notice some of the racist language or racist issues that are coming up, or you're just trying to educate your peers on it, understanding, one, being able to recognize what performative allyship is. Performative allyship is really this theatrical, everyone look at the fact that I am now woke, I am now able to advocate for the Black community, and I am therefore affected by it. So this performative style of allyship really centers yourself instead of really centers the approach to change what the problem is. And this is not what we're hoping to go towards. This is more so what we're hoping to be aware of and step away from, right? So the goal in understanding performative is recognizing that when someone is centering themselves in someone else's oppression, they may not be aware of the privilege that they hold to begin with in that centering of themselves, but it is our role as social workers to use our tools in our toolbox to have those engaging conversations, be it uncomfortable, be it awkward, really owning that awkwardness that comes into a place where you have to acknowledge or have to bring someone in, instead of calling them out, calling them into their performative allyship. And then the second component is really this personal PR. So this idea that, hey, here's a personal brand that I own, that I am now anti-racist, and I want everyone to see that I am anti-racist. And it really goes against the idea of what we're hoping for in the actionable items of allyship. And then the third component is the after the fact. So after the fact is an example here, and this is not representative of the NASW, it's just a point to call out, is with Starbucks. They had a moment of PR issues where they once said, okay, we're not going to allow any Black Lives Matter. We're not going to allow any Black Lives Matter paraphernalia to be worn in our store by our employees. And then they received significant amount of consumer backlash and saying, well, you allow other political, socioeconomic agendas to be displayed in the store. So why is this an issue? Then after the fact, it became, okay, you know what, go ahead, we'll allow everyone to wear Black Lives Matter paraphernalia. It's no issue. We were just trying to do X, Y, and Z. So that's from an organizational standpoint, right? And us as social workers were probably the first ones to really understand what that was. So when we see it and recognize it in our friends, it's kind of the same way. And I guess friends may not be the healthiest way to describe it here. In our social work settings, when we are able to notice it after the fact, that is still performative. So Dwayne, you can go to the next slide at this point now. And then, so breaking down the privilege that's connected to that performative piece, this phrase of checking your privilege, just kind of giving you all a basic understanding of what that means, right? So this isn't a place that we can go and get a specific definition of what it means to check your privilege. We all have privileges, and we all have, to some level, some type of experience with oppression. But what we're talking about here on this call is how these privileges and oppressions exchange with each other in the way that it exploits someone else's pain, right? So that's how we're going to operationalize it and look at it from this context of this presentation. So when we're looking at checking your privilege, it's not really so much this derogatory approach and saying, well, you have privilege, therefore you're a bad person. Rather, it is you have a privilege that allows you access to certain opportunities that other people may not. And specifically in the context of what we're talking about is the racial privilege, right? So specifically looking at white privilege and how it interacts with Black oppression. So checking that privilege as a white social worker, meaning that how are you using your privilege in your places, and how are you aware that, okay, if you have this certain privilege, how does it show up for you in your organization? That if you work with Black peers, how does it show up differently for them? And then challenging the system of power and the infrastructure of power at your organization to use it in a way that is an extension of allyship. And that's honestly, I kind of got ahead of myself a bit, but that whole de-weaponizing it. So weaponizing your privilege, I'm going to start there, is the process of using this privilege to hide behind it. So almost like a cloak of invisibility, like, okay, well, no, here's the issue that we have. I'm going to stand behind it and stand in this neutrality of what's happening. But when you de-weaponize your privilege, you know that you have this privilege and you no longer want to stay behind this barrier. So you come to the forefront as an ally to have those difficult conversations on an administrative level, be it a policy level, in so many ways that we can probably expand and create several different calls based off of that in general. And then by doing that, you're learning how to use your privilege as a social worker to, maybe you have access to certain platforms that other social workers, other Black social workers, or other marginalized social workers do not have access to. So you use that privilege in a form of allyship to combat the systemic racism that we see currently going on. And then Dwayne, you can go to the next one. This will be my last segment. So this was an infographic that we, the NASW published out during our last call. And how I wanted to approach this is the idea of this, Someone talking? Oh. And how I wanted to approach this as an idea of micro and macro social work is being able to understand that language, right? Because as social workers, there's very, very finite tools that we have that, even though they may be something very simple as recognizing how a person uses language, that is still a skill of listening that we can use to then interact, and I'm sorry, not interact, but intervene and use some type of intervention with recognizing that language and holding the space for people to then become anti-racist, right? So looking at it from a micro lens, maybe you might hear people that say, I deny that racism is a problem if they're in that fear zone. I avoid hard questions. I strive to be comfortable. I talk to others who look and think like me. So in that fear zone as social workers on the micro level, maybe you might notice that and use some of the skills that you learned in your journey as a social worker to support people in moving from that fear zone to the learning zone and hopefully to the growth zone. And then from the macro perspective, maybe you notice in your organization that your organization denies that racism is really a problem that affects that direct organization. So how are you using your macro ability to challenge the policies that might perpetuate those beliefs? Is it maybe having a conversation with the head of the facility? Is it having a segmented conversation with your supervisor to maybe have a difficult conversation about the way that race is talked about in your organization? I know that some of the organizations I've worked for, race has been usually a taboo topic. It's been a topic that is kind of like bunched in with politics and all of the other things that we kind of fear that if we have these conversations, it's going to devastate the environment. But when we're talking about how we use our allyship as social workers, and still going back to slide 1 of being compassionate in that, knowing that on this continuum, as a micro and a macro social worker, we have the tools and the abilities, and we just need to know our ways and our own abilities of using those tools in our different settings. So as you use your tools going from the fear zone to the learning zone, as a micro and a macro social worker, you recognize not only the language, but you recognize the policies that are beginning to shift and the things that are beginning to maybe become as a part of the norm. One of the things that I'm hoping to really highlight here is that when we're talking about anti-racism, sometimes it's siloed into its own category of D&I. So maybe as a macro social worker, you challenge the administrative component of your organization to say that this D&I component that we can learn once a year and then forget about, maybe we need to integrate that into our organizational mission and values, because that is where we need to be standing as an anti-racist organization. And as you move through that learning zone and that learning curvature of what that looks like, it's not, basically what I'm trying to say here is that it's not a linear process, and it's not a process that is going to be parallel for you or myself. So the way that I might advocate for anti-racist policies or anti-racist actions at an organization I work with may look different from the way that you might do it, because you have a different set of skills. So the whole focus of using this allyship piece here is to educate not only just white social workers, but marginalized social workers of marginalized identities on the call as well, that there is a role that we both have to play together in order to truly move forward in anti-racist action. So I think that that's the end of my segment, and I don't know if I had any other questions. I know I kind of spoke through most of them, most of the slides, Dwayne. Is there anything that needs to be addressed now?
I'll just remind folks, please feel free to raise your hand if you would like to ask a question or share a resource, or feel free to type in the chat box. If you have a real strong agreement with what somebody's saying, feel free to use the thumbs up or the clap hands emoji that's also in there. So while any questions come through, I just wanted to echo what you were saying, Michelle, in terms of how clinicians can use both their clinical and their macro skills in their settings. And one prime example that I think about is on the national call that happened on Juneteenth. Our NASW CEO, Angela McLean, gave a pretty good example when he was in the Child Welfare Division in the state of Massachusetts, and how they realized that 30% of white families were white children were being placed with family members in their child welfare department, but only 17% of Black children were being placed with family members. And so realizing that institutional racism is so ingrained in some of the systems that we work in, that's where, as clinicians, we can really push back, and it's so important to use those macro skills, whether it's data or advocacy or political resources, to slowly, sometimes it's real slow to push back, or sometimes you can get things really quickly. We're finding out some days, like, look how quickly this Mississippi flag changed, right? Some of it's because of this political pressure and financial pressure of some of these sports. But I think that there's a lot of good internal things that social workers can do within their organizations. And historically, social workers have been really great advocates, both pushing from within their organizations and pushing from the outside. And we have to continue to do both of those things. But I don't see any hands at this point. We are going to send out the PowerPoint after this. We'll send it out with the evaluation, so everyone will get that later this week. No other questions right now, so we can go ahead and move on. And if we circle back to some questions, we'll bring you back in, Michelle.
Sounds good.
All right, so Dominique, I think you are up next.
Okay, cool beans. Should I share my screen or? Okay, all right, thanks. Well, hi everyone. My name is Dominique Golden. I am the current secretary for NASW Michigan chapter. So I'm really excited to work with you all today and work with Michelle and Sara to really share more practices on allyship, advocacy, and action. We're really excited to help move our profession more into an action-oriented type. Yes, we have been that in the past, but we just want to turn up the notch a bit. So really excited about that. I am passionate about social entrepreneurship and working with social workers to help them learn the tools, resources, and network to help get their ideas off the ground or nonprofit. And also, I am a graduate of Wayne State School of Social Work. So yeah, let's get started. So with advocacy, as we all know, we seek equity and opportunities for several realms, right? And one major way of advancing the social justice agenda is through advocacy. So I'm really excited to share with you guys today what advocacy looks like in social work and also the cost of advocacy. And since majority of our profession focuses more on clinical, I also want to share a theoretical framework for advocacy to give you more of an idea of what type of theories and social changes and things like that we can actually apply in our everyday lives. And it just gives us an opportunity to look at things from a different perspective. So when we look at advocacy in social work, there are actually two main ways to look at this. And it can be shown first through case advocacy, as we see that it's individual or family here. This is something that's more so short term, where us as social workers can support this community through food, water, and shelter. Those are through more basic needs that are short term. And then when looking to support a larger structure, whether it be community or organization, this would be considered cause advocacy. And this enables us to provide more long-term impact. And so what we're seeing, some ideals or examples of that would really be meaningful employment on long-term, right? Equal opportunity. And what we're seeing right now is a perfect example of social justice. And Dwayne, whenever you're ready, I can pop it to the next screen. Thanks. All right, so when we look at cause advocacy today, you may be saying like, okay, Dominique, this is great, but you know, what does cause advocacy look like? So as I mentioned before, this here, what we're experiencing today is really a great example of cause advocacy. If you take a look to the right of your screen, this here shows a map as of June 18th, where we can see the impact of communities mobilizing across the 50 states responding to George Floyd's death and his unfortunate death. And it's not just him, but it's been many, 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 many years of things building up within communities, not only Black community, but people of color feeling marginalized and really advocating to let their voices be heard. So we can really see this as a great opportunity or great example, excuse me, of communities mobilizing here. And this is a great example of cause advocacy because it's actually showing larger systematic changes occurring, which is the ultimate goal of cause advocacy. I think that's what I really would want everyone to focus on here as I walk through these slides, just thinking about, you know, asking yourself, how can I become more action oriented within my profession, whether that be micro, meso, or macro, which Sara will touch on a bit later. But and I also have here, as of June 4th, as you can see here, House of Democrats introduced policing reform bill named for George Floyd. So it's another great example of it being more action oriented. And I wanted to share kind of the relationship of cause advocacy as it relates to outcomes and impact there. And Dwayne, would you mind flipping? Thank you. Also, I know our main focus today is on social justice, but I wanted to share a few examples of how social workers can engage in many types of cause advocacy. That's like legal advocacy, legislative advocacy, and self-advocacy for equal rights. So we can see here just within the last few years, these are great examples of what this cause advocacy looks like in person, and also its impact. As we can see here, this actually was as of last night here with the Confederate flag being removed, and also seeing that cities are cutting police budgets as well, have a women's march, and also we see Black Lives Matter and lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender rights here, also including plus in that as well, just being conscious there. So I just wanted to kind of provide more of an idea of what that looks like. And self-advocacy is also something I wanted to highlight here because it's really action of advocating for oneself or your views or interests that can happen within your workplace as well. Now, looking at other factors of advocacy really to consider here is thinking about when maybe you're wanting to plan something that's dealing with advocacy going on right now, right? So many times when we hear capital, we think of just funds, but it's really important to consider how do you identify forms of capital, whether that be human, right? And looking at what resources you actually have, and that human capital can fall under education, training, any type of skills that contribute value. And it's really important to consider the depleted resources that we could potentially work against our cause when we're forming advocacy, meaning like what has already been done, what type of restrictions have been in place for this advocacy or cause that you want to combat at the time, right, for social justice. And then lastly, it's really important to think about what budgets look like from this short-term and long-term impact that you're wanting to cause, right? And one way that we can do that is by creating a cost-benefit analysis to see how we can break even for that advocacy cause that we're working towards. So all this, of course, is really conditional based on the situation and what it looks like. But I just wanted to throw this out here so you guys can have an idea of what that would look like at this time. Thanks, Dwayne. Now, in terms of theoretical framework for advocacy, practice and policy model, I wanted to just share this here in case someone wants to take a deeper dive into what this advocacy practice would look like. And so I'm just going to highlight a few here. And so like if we look at systems theory, when we're first starting out within this advocacy framework, it's really important for us to consider what's going on here, because as we know as social workers, many external factors can affect one internal factor, right, or the individual as a whole. So it's really important for us to take a deep dive and to look at what's all going on there before we become an advocate for a particular community and or client. And we know that we can't just break things up into individual components, but we must look at them, as a whole. And also I wanted to highlight strengths perspectives here, because that's really emphasizing the individual's capabilities, talents, and competencies. So how can we highlight those to empower those communities that we're advocating for and create a resilience empowerment within those individuals as well? And so from there, Sara will talk to you guys more about our action portion of our presentation here and what you can do to create tangible action.
Hi everyone, my name is Sara Bazydlo and I am the Region 11 representative for NASW Michigan. And my region specifically is Wayne County. One thing to build off of Michelle and Dominique, I think our overall goal, like we had mentioned with this talk, is for social workers to be able to walk away with some tangible next steps, and being able to feel like we can collectively be able to make a difference. And so I know too, I've noticed that in general, the movement has started to grow tired. I see less people out at protests and sit-ins. I see, conversations have dwindled. And so we really wanted this to also kind of boost our momentum, to kind of re-energize and encourage us, and to kind of, like Dominique had said, kind of turn the dial up a little bit on our advocacy and action. And so when we were putting this together, like Dominique had said, everybody is going to be different as far as our own kind of strengths and skills. So when we think about kind of a call to action, we want to be able to kind of play into our own personal strengths, preferences. Not everybody is going to want to participate in a protest, and especially in the middle of a pandemic. Some of us will feel comfortable being out there. Others not so much. And so when we think about a call to action, we want to make sure that it's a call that you feel comfortable taking that role. And as I've been talking with other social workers, specifically for me, my work is clinical. And I noticed where once we kind of get into our professions as a social worker and we get into our work, we start to forget about the rest of what social work really calls us to do. Our code of ethics urges us and requires us ethically to engage in social policy and activism. And so that's really what we're asking of everyone, is to think about, what are you going to do? What roles are you going to take right now to be able to create some social change? Dwayne, if you want to go to the next slide. So we kind of broke this down into looking at, in every area of social work practice, we have an opportunity for intervention and for advocacy. And this can look like a myriad of things. So most of these examples are also in a document, a Google Doc that NASW created as a resource for social workers. And so these are just a couple snippets from that resource, and there are even more listed there. So if you find things that kind of spark your interest, but you're looking for something more, we'll make sure that we post the link to that Google Doc to kind of get some ideas flowing. I see Dwayne just added that, so you can always find more on there. But from kind of the micro perspective, this can look like writing an article for the bridge. NASW Michigan has a newsletter, and we are always looking for social workers to write articles, to put calls to action in there. This can look like voter registration drives, attending city council meetings, or actively engaging in our local government. So really taking a look at what's going on in our communities, in our city, and within our county that can be an opportunity for intervention and for our participation. It can also look like attending webinars like you are today, joining a protest if you feel comfortable, or if protesting isn't your thing, it could be making signs and then donating them to groups that are going and protesting. It could be providing snacks or a cooler full of water. It's been really hot these past couple of weeks, and I still see people out and about in this heat, and providing a cooler of water can be an easy just way of showing support, or helping clean up after protests. It could be educating people on how to get registered to vote, talking to our clients. I ask my clients all the time, are you registered to vote? Have you heard about your absentee ballot that you are receiving an application in the mail for? So just really starting to talk about, with not only social workers, but with our clients and the communities that we serve, ways that we can really have a big impact. Even one of these is better than none. If we move into outside of kind of micro social work, looking at meso and macro social work interventions. So again, looking at kind of big picture, organizing a study or reading groups to better understand Black issues in history. There are so many books that have been out there that are just now gaining popularity as more people are wanting to learn and to educate themselves, and starting a book club, right? Not just doing something on your own, but engaging a community. It could be of coworkers, fellow social workers, colleagues, neighbors, family, it could be anybody. Other examples that we have on here, demand to provide assistance to all police academies to provide training workshops and seminars. There have been a lot of talk recently about how to incorporate social work into police departments and working with police, and what role would social work play if that idea were to play out. And how social workers in our training related to de-escalation techniques, related to mental health and substance use, homelessness and housing, all of those skills that we have are very much needed within police departments. And so how can social workers really play a key role in not just providing education or support to police departments, but also coming alongside. And I know there's a lot of different opinions on that, so I'll make sure that we have some time to talk about that, but just really kind of looking at big picture. If we see what the problem is, what are some multiple areas that we can really intervene, and where can social work play a role? On the next slide, I have more macro examples, things like voting, which can seem so simple, but we know that voter turnout hasn't been the greatest. So not only us going out and voting, but making sure that we are asking others if they are voting as well. Signing petitions to support Black communities, supporting legislation that can make an impact, and ensuring that bad legislation that can also make an impact doesn't pass. So really kind of diving into legislation and understanding what that potential impact is. Is this something that aligns with our social work values and will help the communities that we serve, or is this going to be further a disadvantage? And how do we provide that education to ensure that bad legislation?
I don't know, but
Was there a question?
Sorry, I think someone's line just got muted.
Okay. And then another one which I think is important is really getting engaged in local, state, and national organizations. You know, social workers have such a breadth and depth of our practice and our knowledge and our abilities, and we often don't present ourselves as social workers when we come to the table. And so really highlighting our profession and our expertise by engaging with local and state organizations, showing up and saying, you know, I am a social worker, this is what matters to me, this is what I'm seeing, can absolutely make an impact. And when we can do that collectively, right, when we can get a group of social workers together and we can use a collective voice, that can make an even larger impact. I'm really kind of surprised that more people haven't been turned into social workers to ask some of these big questions related to policy change, related to kind of what some next steps are in this really important movement. But I won't get on my soapbox, we'll keep moving. So I think another really important way to show action and advocacy, Jane, if you go back to the previous slide, is that how we spend our money is a form of advocacy. So thinking about what organizations do we want to donate to? Things like bail funds. The Detroit Justice Center does incredible work and are always looking for funding and support even just outside of their bail project. Supporting Black-owned businesses. MLive, I think it was either today or yesterday, it was a recent article that just came out where they released an article about a database where you can search for Black-owned businesses in Michigan. So really being mindful about where we spend our money and how we spend our money. Purchasing memberships to, the first thing that popped in my mind was to some of our museums. So for example, the Charles H. Wright African American Museum in downtown Detroit is their memberships. It's $35 for a single one-year membership. And they are really in need of support right now because of COVID. They had to shut down all of their tours, their events, all their revenue streams pretty much came to a screeching halt in March. And by the beginning of June, they were almost out of their revenue funds. So thinking about ways that we can purchase memberships to museums, to donate to places that are preserving Black history and also providing for our community as well. And it can be something as simple as purchasing a membership, and then you get to go to the museum as many times as you want throughout the year. And the final one, as far as funding goes, endorsing candidates and donating towards their campaign, which NASW helps with that through MPACE, which we will talk about, but even on your own, being able to endorse candidates through funding. In addition to this, you know, we have an NASW toolkit, which is fantastic. A lot of our information tends to overlap with another resource toolkit that was created called Black Lives Matter. It's an anti-racism resources for social workers and therapists. And we can post the link to that. This resource is also nice because it covers everything from anti-racism books, articles, toolkits, YouTube videos, podcasts. It has self-care resources, a guide for finding a Black therapist or therapist of color. And there's a lot of information that can be very useful on there. So as you're looking to, as you're thinking about, okay, what do I want my learning to look like? What do I want my involvement to be? Starting with some of these toolkits and kind of picking and choosing, seeing what will work best for you and what will have the greatest impact on your practice. The next slide is kind of related to self-education resources. This is kind of my call to other white social workers. You know, it's really on us to do the internal work to unlearn the racism that we have learned in our society. And we have to remember and to hold each other accountable that no matter how open-minded, socially conscious, anti-racist we are, we still have old, learned, hidden biases that we need to examine. And then it is our responsibility to check ourselves daily for our own stereotypes, prejudice, and discrimination. And ways that we can do that, you know, the resources are on the toolkits, but it really is my call to other white social workers that we have a lot of work to do, and it is work that we should absolutely be doing on a daily basis to be able to be of service to our fellow social workers and the communities that we serve. It's only going to make us better, and it's going to make us better allies. And then my final piece, because if anybody has talked to me, they know how much I love NASW, is that there are action steps that we can take within NASW Michigan. So NASW is our advocating body for the social work field and the communities that we serve. Like Max had said in the very beginning of our call, that NASW Michigan alone, just the staff, cannot do everything that we as social workers need to do across our state. There's not enough people. They need all of us. And so our membership dollars are used to fund the work of NASW and our state chapters, and the time and energy and engagement of our members in NASW will just amplify all of the work that we are able to do. It gives us the chance to really cover our whole state. And so for those of you who are on the call who are not NASW members, I really encourage you to think about just the value that not only that NASW can add to your practice, but what you can add to the organization and our Michigan chapter. In general, for action steps with NASW, the best way to stay up to date with us is through the NASW Michigan Facebook page. There is so much going on. We post all the time. So the best way to stay up to date is following us on Facebook. You can also get involved with NASW Michigan Legislative and Social Policy Committee, or our LSP committee, which Algeria can talk a little bit more about. We can support and get involved in MPACE. MPACE aims to endorse and support candidates for political office that hold the same or similar values and ethics of the social work field, which is key when we are looking for candidates to endorse and to vote into office. We have a myriad of work groups through NASW Michigan, and then you can also check on the website to see the legislative agenda and to be able to really see what NASW Michigan is working on kind of behind the scenes, which is so key when it comes to social workers wanting to get more involved, I think, in policy and legislation, is turning to, okay, what is NASW doing? What are some of the avenues that they're taking? What are they keeping their eye on for me to be able to support? That's my little plug for NASW. And then finally, one upcoming event, which is actually taking place tomorrow, is another webinar focusing on social work and the future of policing. This is in partnership with NASW, with the national office. Jane, if you can go to the next slide when you can. So if you're feeling like you want to, I mean, the topic as far as social work and the future of policing, I think is one that all of us have been talking about, and we have various views and opinions on what that looks like. And so I think this webinar, if this is of any interest to you or other social workers that you know, I strongly encourage you to register for that and just to continue the conversation and to learn from that discussion. So as we kind of wrap up this portion, we have time still for questions and discussion. I know there was a lot of activity in the chat box that I was not able to read while I was talking. But like I said, our hope when Michelle and Dominique and I came together to talk about what our vision was for this discussion, you know, it really was to encourage and empower social workers to really consider, how can I be an ally, how can I advocate, and how can I take action in every level of social work practice, to really keep the momentum going and to show that social workers are here, we're here to stay, and we have important things that we need to share. So with that, I think I'll hand it back over to Dwayne, who can address any questions and I think open the lines if there are any comments.
All right, thanks, Sarah. And again, please feel free to raise your hand if you want to directly speak. We'd love to have a lot of folks share your thoughts and perspectives on this conversation so far today, or what you've been thinking about. There are 3 questions that have come through, and this could be for any 3 of you. This first one came in while Michelle was talking from Missy. How do we ensure that we are de-weaponizing and using our privilege in advance of Black Lives Matter instead of stepping over, speaking for, or making it about us?
That's a great question. The first thing that comes to my mind, just only as a suggestion, not really as a standard procedure, is to practice knowing when to step up and when to step back. Like I mentioned earlier, is that we all have these contexts of privileges, and we have to really get self-aware with examining how they interact with someone else's pain and how it exploits someone else's experience. So I would just say really understanding how you practice the step up and step back rule, which what that basically is if someone is having a conversation, and maybe I'm just going to create a hypothetical example, if maybe a Black peer is educating someone about the Black experience and Black trauma, and you visibly see that they're just wearing down from having to go through that conversation over and over again, you might just ask, like, are you okay if I step in? Would you, like, is it okay? And then if they say no, then obviously step back. But if they say yes, and say, hey, you know, maybe this is a conversation that I'm better equipped to handle and better equipped to have with you. Really just knowing how to insert yourself in an authentic way. The whole purpose, I think, that I really wanted to emphasize is having this authentic approach of allyship, meaning that, you know, your style of allyship may not be parallel to the person next to you, but if it's authentic in the approach of wanting to make sure that you are doing the right work, then knowing when to step up and step back will just come a little bit easier to you. So that's what I would say.
Great, thank you, Michelle. The next question that came through from Monica: as a new school social worker, what could I do to better educate my peers in advocacy and equality of others? I'm guessing that this question probably could be more for any social work, not just school social work. So maybe if any of you could give some examples of how you can talk about how we can educate our peers in whatever setting we might be in.
Dwayne, I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part of the question?
Sure. What can I do, or we as social workers do, to better educate our peers in advocacy and equality of others?
Well, I first think, I think it's important to kind of look like, what does advocacy look like in the classroom? I believe she said she's a school social worker. So first looking at what is that dynamic there? How, are there any type of rules or regulations that you would have to apply first in the classroom with advocacy? And then 2, I think it's really a great idea to start with advocacy as in what it looks like for them, depending on the age group you're working with. And like, for example, I shared today what advocacy is looking like, and kind of really diving deep by asking questions. So how does this look like? What does this look like for you? You know, How are you seeing this and how is it affecting you? And I think starting there, opening it up, you kind of see where your client or the child is at, depending on the age group. And I think it's a really great idea to create a relationship as to what's going on that we're seeing presently. And maybe you could do that through pictures. Like I kind of showed what advocacy looks like for different communities that have been marginalized, and starting that conversation there, because it really can look differently for so many people. And I think it's important too, we're actually gonna share this PowerPoint with you guys. So feel free to take any of these resources there. But I thought Michelle and Sara did a really great job of just providing tangible ways that really could work for everyone. So even if it's just kind of having some time to dedicate to that advocacy and its relationship to impact in terms of what it looks like when bills are passed, and just showing examples of what's really going on here, I think would be a great start.
Yeah.
I was gonna just say also, hey everyone, I'm Algeria Wilson. I'm the policy director for NASW Michigan. If you are in a school, or if you are a professor, if you're a teacher, a professor, or even if you are in a private practice, whatever your setting is, social workers are educators. You know, we have the ability to be able to teach and provide knowledge, whether it's to our clients, to students, to wherever. So the role you have is very important, especially in a classroom setting, to be able to have critical conversations, to help students be continuous learners and, you know, intrigue their learning experiences. So definitely start there and use that space and platform that you have to be able to expand the mind. So that's the only comment I wanted to make. Michelle, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, actually what I was going to say kind of ties what both you and Dominique just said, really focusing in on what the organizational purpose is at the school. I've had a lot of conversations with my friends, some of them that work in Fortune 500 companies, that are saying that their supervisors are suggesting that they all just go home and learn Black history, or they use PTO to learn Black history. Really understanding like what role is that education advocacy going to play in your organization? Because though it's great for you to learn Black history and learn the context of oppression and how it has affected the community, I think you really should be centered in what it's going to do for your organization. Because I think some of that personal education, if we go and open a book and read The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson, though that's great, but how is it going to inform what you're doing at your job? And how is it going to inform the students that you're working with, or whatever organization that you're a part of? I think when we're talking about our work settings, tying it to the organizational values and mission is so important for you to understand how advocacy and understanding what we're talking about is going to direct you in what you're doing. Dwayne, you're muted.
Great, I muted myself. Max, I'm gonna go ahead and unmute you. Go ahead.
Okay. Earlier in the chat room, I asked how NASW Michigan can make ourselves more anti-racist. And I think it's important, although we're leading these calls, to recognize that NASW Michigan also has a long ways to go. And my hope is that with the guidance and the teamwork with many of you on this call, we can truly make NASW Michigan an anti-racist association. It's going to take some work. I think it takes a lot of introspection and crucial conversations. And there have been some really good ideas shared, and I want to thank you for that. But I really want it to be something that we work continuously on, and we start sooner than later. So any ideas that the leaders of this call have, what we can do, that would be much appreciated.
I would
And
suggest,
before other folks jump on, I just want to tie in a question that came in from the chat box that I think directly relates to what Max is asking. This is from Bethany about how do social workers respond to the tension between the possibilities that exist within the field of social work to recognize, address, and end racism in our field and society, while at the same time recognizing that social work has racist beginnings and history and reproduces many practices and oppressive systems. So I think that that's a prime conversation that we're having right now, and I think throughout the field, and maybe you could share some of your insights on what you think can happen.
So I like to kind of answer some of that, and then I'll switch it over to folks. I think it's also important to recognize some of the work that we are beginning to do as an association. NASW Michigan, as well as our several different chapters across the US, we have been having weekly conversations and have created a racial justice task force to be able to look at various different spaces and places within this profession that need to be improved, because we recognize that we have a lot of ways to go as it relates to dismantling oppression within the systems that we work in. And it's also important to remember that as social workers, a lot of the work that we do is working within the systems to change the systems while also not becoming a part of the system. And that work is very critical. And it's the time now to just reflect, figure out what we have perpetuated, unintentionally perpetuated, and begin to take those steps forward. And I will say, just at NASW Michigan, I'm really proud that our staff here and our board is very committed to doing so. You know, I spoke out with national leadership and provided some tangible steps. But I think all of y'all's insight on this call is very helpful for us as staff to be able to lift up to our national office, right? And to say, this is what we want to do for our profession. So it's important to recognize what we are doing and still figure out how we can get to where we really want to be.
Jerry, I just wanted to add something. You brought up a great point just about systems. And recently my mentor and I were actually discussing systems, and she recommended a really great book. And her name is Mary Jo Shaw, and she's on the call. And the book is called Systems Thinking for Social Change. And it's about how readers can actually effectively understand and function within a current system. And sometimes I think we're constantly trying to figure out how we can function within this system, what are the ways we can operate, and figure out how we can serve our clients. But it's also important for us to have an innovative approach in thinking within these systems. Should we continue to operate within this system? Should we leverage our human social capital to create new systems? How can we function here? And that's what I really loved about working on the advocacy portion, because it was a way for me to really dive deep into what the relationship is between being passionate about an issue and wanting to function within a system that I may feel is broken or what have you, and how to create and function within there to create social change, work with my network I may have to make a greater impact. But what would that end result look like? What is that ultimate outcome? What does that outcome look like in terms of social value, right? And that social value could be that, hey, we decreased the number of, it could be violence in an area. It could be that we raised awareness for a certain cause. But what exactly does that look like to you? And so I'll share the link to the book, but I'm learning so much about just having an innovative approach to old ways, right? And many times we've seen that these innovative approaches are working. And so I really hoped, if anything, that through those slides I shared, that everyone's kind of able to get an idea of like what advocacy looked like for them, because it's definitely new approaches. But I think something we should really think about is how we're functioning within the system and how we can function more effectively in innovative ways.
I also wanted to add something. I wanted to actually build off of what both, it seems like every time you all say something, I'm like, yeah, I want to add to that. So I want to build off of the point of what Algeria and Dominique just said, that to specifically answer your question, Max, I think that what we're talking about is creating a strategic plan that is it's basically a living organizational document that identifies maybe 5 points of like 5 major points, and then it breaks it down into like 3 sub-tangible points of each component, and then creates a historical timeline that includes like any amendments and any kind of growth for it. So I think just the short answer of what I wanted to add on to what you're saying, what you're asking for, Max, would be that strategic plan. And then for Dwayne, the question that was asked, for me, every time I hear that social work is it was built on racist principles, I do agree with that. But then also, I think we as social workers should also talk about how social work is taught. So for our social work educators on the call, how are you approaching topics like the Black Panther Party? Though it may not have started as far dated back as Jane Addams, that is still a social work approach. And even though there may be some things that maybe come up that seem to be problematic about the way it's discussed in our historical literature, it's still social work centralized. So I think that when we're talking about how to answer that, when I'm talking about how to answer that question is really how do we, like, and that goes back to becoming an ally, like how do we go back to what we have learned, not just about like white privilege, but what we learned about the social work profession in general? Is it just the Jane Addams, or what other stories did we not learn from the time frame of Jane Addams when social work became a thing at the Hull House in Chicago? So how are we also including other components of other culturally sensitive aspects of social work in the way that we understand social work, so that it doesn't seem just one directional? That's it.
Absolutely.
I'll give lots of applause for that comment, Michelle. And I think that ties it directly into a comment from Veronica, somewhat about like the visibility of social work in general, sometimes knowing our own history. And social workers, I think for most of our field, we like to give our clients a voice and empower them, but sometimes we forget to do that for ourselves and take a back seat to sometimes patting ourselves on the back for our expertise. And Veronica's question was just really, why don't social workers have a broader presence in the media and having a voice on supporting their communities and telling, their stories? And I think we've seen really since the pandemic started that social workers have gotten a lot more media attention and a lot of positive media attention too. And I think especially since the president mentioned the words social workers specifically, that's provided a unique opportunity for you all to use your voice too in these conversations. I think the media, the local medias, are specifically really hungry for stories, whether it's about mental health or grief or police reform or community involvement. And if you have expertise, please don't rely on NASW to always be the one doing that. We need you out there. You probably have better contacts to your local news than we may have. And so the more we can have our faces visible in the field and to the public, the more the public's going to have a better understanding about what we do. And that's going to then hopefully roll the ball when we talk about power at the tables, whether it's political power, money power, organizational power. So if we can get social workers visible in whether it's newsprint, radio, or TV, we need more positive representation of you all who are on this call here today and your colleagues who aren't here. So Algier, I know you were going to jump in something too.
I don't know if I had anything else to say. I was just really all this good energy.
That's the nice thing about doing these calls too. You feel really good about your field when you're done with them. You're like, oh, my people.
Yeah. I want to build off of that, because I agree, like just the sense of, even through a Zoom call, just the sense of community that we have in all of us talking about a topic that is so important and about things that are really, that we're very passionate about. Like, Advocacy is thinking about what I'm going to do, what I'm going to call to action, but really I also want to go back to me as a field. So I'm going to be doing something I'm looking to give an action so that working. Let's see.
You're breaking up just a little bit there, Sara.
Well, shoot. I'll type it.
You gotta love technology.
I know.
So what were you saying? We can hear you now.
Oh, you can hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hopefully it stays working. I know I was just kind of emphasizing the importance of taking people to advocacy and action.
You're gone again, Sara.
Damn.
We heard advocacy, emphasize the importance of community and advocacy on this call.
I'll type it.
Yeah, it's really great to, you know, have this amount of energy and interest in these topics and issues. And I'm hoping, you know, this momentum doesn't just stop with these conversations and these discussions, that everyone on this call does really engage in some of those tangible actions that were provided. And also, you know, continue to be involved with NASW, whether it's through our legislative and social policy committees, which meets monthly, third Friday of every month from 12 to 1:30 p.m. Right now we're meeting via Zoom. Or if it's, you know, getting involved in our MPACE committee, which currently is meeting monthly on the first Monday of the month at 11:30 a.m. But, you know, getting engaged and getting involved where you are, inviting us into where you are, because it starts locally, right? It starts with you, so absolutely.
I've also included our short little survey that we put out for our first call, but if you didn't get a chance to fill that out the first time, we asked you to do that. That just gives us a sense kind of where you'd like to go after this call. If you want to help us form a task force or a committee, if you're interested in some educational topics. And I know, going back to the conversation about kind of what we can do inside our own organizations, you know, education is a really important thing that we all can bring into our organizations, especially if you already have kind of established systems within your agencies, whether it's like a monthly CE or some sort of learning platform that you all have to do as a collective. Bring in different speakers, bring in topics that are relevant right now that may not be maybe focused almost entirely on clinical. Bring in an off-the-wall macro topic every once in a while, because I think that's going to keep the energy going. And I think if you are thinking that a topic is needed, it's almost guaranteed that someone else in your organization is also thinking that same thing, but may not feel comfortable actually vocalizing it. And so that's where social workers can really be strong advocates internally within organizations. And use it, you know, sometimes you can use, oh, I have to get this continuing ed credit as part of my licensure, so let's bring in you know, there's ways to frame it to your organization if they may find some hesitancy to do that to begin with. And if you need help finding someone, you know, that's also an area that we might be able to help out. Our ethics committee does trainings. You know, we do advocacy trainings as well, but we also know folks out there who might be a better fit. And if you know good folks who are speaking on things or want to be brought into the fold, we also are always looking for folks who can share things with our membership, especially as we want to continue on this as like a series of calls with our members. We want to make sure that our trainers are continually shifting as well.
So Dwayne, I wanted to mention one thing, if that's okay. As we talk about the future calls and power of future calls, I know the topic of reinvestment into communities is very timely and is on the top of everyone's brains. And we're hoping to here soon have a conversation on reinvestment back into the communities as it relates to defunding the police or reallocating funding and things of that sort. So please look out for that. And then it looks like we had a comment in the chat about future call for Black economic empowerment, and I would love to have a call around that. That's exciting. So anywho, I'll turn it back over to you, Dwayne.
I see Mary Jo has your hand, so I will unmute your line, Mary Jo.
Thanks, Wayne. I want to thank all of our presenters. They were just fabulous. And I wanted to pick up on Sarah's themes around using our money. I think this is so important and we don't think about it. You know, we don't think about how our financial choices impact social activism. So like looking at where our 401k money is invested, our 403b, NASW, I want to personally look at where do we invest our endowment funds, you know, for our mission related, like, are we investing in private prisons, for example, and other things that we don't believe in social work. And so I think these are huge amount of monies that we're talking about in pension plans and in 401k investments and in 403bs. And if we really want to move and create change, we've got to think about how we use money and how we apply money. So that's one thing I want to take on as an NASW member. I want to start asking national, like, where are we investing our own money as an organization? And I think we all should be asking our organizations and our pension plans and our investment plans, where is that money invested? Because we certainly don't want to be supporting like private prisons and other things. And so I think that would be, I really love that Sarah's pointing us in that direction about how we use our money.
Yes,
Thanks, Mary Jo.
thank you, Mary Jo.
I'm just going to go back to. All right, let me see if there are any other questions that have come through at this point. I do see our regional rep, Judy, is wanting to set up something in the UP, and I know a couple other of our board reps are also looking to set up more regional calls as well, similar to this. So if you are interested in helping out with those, especially if you're part of a larger organization or a school of social work who want to partner with us on that sort of a event in the future, please reach out to us. We want to bring in as many folks into this conversation as possible. I see that Max has raised her hand. Max, go ahead.
Yeah, I got shut down by Zoom a minute ago, so I don't know if you mentioned that we have something in the planning with Derek and Cheryl Kubiak. Has that been mentioned?
We're gonna have a few call here soon around reinvestment and as it relates to reallocating funding. So for folks to keep an eye out for that call.
Thanks for bringing that up, Max. I think there are so many critical conversations that social workers need to be involved in right now. I think, you know, that's the challenge and opportunity of 2020 that keeps presenting us, right? It's like we keep being thrown these huge systems and issues that really, this is why we went into the field, right? Is to dismantle things. And we're seeing with a pandemic and a racial justice climate and a giant election that this is our time to shine. And if we don't, really, we're not living up to our capacity as social workers. And it's exhausting work, right? This is a time for us to also figure out, making sure that with everything going on, that we're taking those moments of self-care to really reflect, I think, as Michelle said at the beginning, that we're not burning ourselves out during this whole process. And part of that reason is why we exist as an organization at NASW. You know, we are your social worker. So when you need a resource, when you need a training, when you need an advocate, that's what we exist to be. And then knowing, you know, we have our own limitations as an organization, as staff as well. So that's why we are, it's like reciprocal. We need you all, you need us. We want to make sure that we are going forward as the strongest team possible and as the strongest field possible. I did see we've just got a couple minutes left. There was a couple of questions about continuing education. So as long as you registered for this event and that's the link you used to sign on, you're good to go. You don't need to do anything else. So you'll get a CE emailed to you within 30 days. We'll also be sending out an evaluation as well as the links to the PowerPoint and a couple of the other key resources that were listed and the chat log after this call, sometime probably in the next couple of days. So be on the lookout for that. Are there any last questions before we wrap it up today? Colleen mentioned talk to judges and other elected officials in the legal systems about where they stand. Absolutely, Colleen. I think that as we look at the next election, it's not just about the big names, right? It's not just about who's the president. It's about all down ticket, including judges, including the local folks, and making sure that we are educated about where all those folks stand on what is important to us as social workers. All right, well, do our presenters have any final thoughts or words? See some no's. All right, well, I want to thank again everyone for being here. Between this call and our first call, we've had about 800 social workers on 2 meetings, which is pretty fantastic. And so we want to continue that momentum. We want to bring folks in who maybe aren't able to be on at this time, or maybe don't have the technology capacity, and figuring out when, once we do go, hopefully at some point in the nearest future, going back to meeting somewhat in person, that we can have both in person and virtual options. I think that we've seen with the pandemic that the virtual has brought in a lot of new folks to conversations that allowed us as a membership organization to reach out in new ways, and we'll continue to do that. We hope we'll see some folks on the call tomorrow with the national office on policing. On Wednesday, I did want to mention we are having our Meet the Board event. So you've met several of our board members and outgoing board members here tonight, but we have a whole other range of folks. We have 19 board members and some other leaders who are going to be introducing themselves Wednesday from 6 to 7 on Zoom. We'd love to have you join us for that conversation, as well as share your ideas, not just about what we talked about today, but what else you want to see NASW work on, what we'd really like to see regionally, and share kind of your perspectives on that. But with that, I just want to thank everyone for being here, and we'll close it out for tonight. So we'll see you all soon. Thanks again.